There's an article in a place that I'd never heard of, the American Interest. It's an article by a guy named Ben Judah, and it says, "The Right's Straw Left." And here's what it says. "One of the most exhausting tropes in American conservatism is that the left has no ideas. I've lost count of the amount of times I've been informed that all they have to offer is identity politics. It is all the more exhausting because it is simply not true. The left, the real left that is, not the confused Democratic establishment, has been living through the most dramatic policy renaissance in decades." I love this. It's a dramatic policy renaissance. Where are they getting their ideas? From FDR. Legitimately, like this is their policy renaissance. Their policy renaissance is they're going to go back to FDR's policies during the Great Depression, which lengthened the Great Depression by somewhere around 8 years, according to economists at UCLA. This is the policy renaissance they're talking about. We're going to reinstate policies and expand policies that have bankrupted half of Western Europe. So here are some of these ideas. Whoever ends up running, says Ben Judah, a federal jobs guarantee is the big idea already set to dominate the Democratic primaries in 2020. This simple idea would see the government guarantee a job to 13.1 million Americans who are currently unemployed or underemployed. The go-to report on the topic from the Center on Budget Policy Priorities suggests a guaranteed wage which would go with each one of these jobs to the tune of $32,500. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this. So, after reading Ben Judah's stunning piece on the brilliant ideas that I am ignoring, apparently, I actually went and I read the entire Center on Budget and Policy Priorities piece on why we need a federal job guarantee. The piece is by Mark Paul, William Darity Jr., and Derek Hamilton. And here is what the piece says. The piece says that we need full employment brought to you by the permanent establishment of a National Investment Employment Corps. The NIEC will provide universal job coverage for all adult Americans. The permanent establishment of the NIEC would eliminate involuntary unemployment. First of all, what jobs would they be doing? They'd be doing all infrastructure jobs. So does this sound like a new idea to you? Infrastructure jobs paid for by the government? It seems to me that every single politician ever has proposed this, including Donald Trump. Every one of them. Bernie Sanders proposed it. Barack Obama proposed it. This is what the stimulus package was supposed to do. It was a giant fail. FDR did this as well. Virtually every president talks about the need for infrastructure. Let's just hire 1 million people and go build some roads. It turns out those are temporary jobs. And then unless you have a plan to keep those people permanently on the government payroll, those people are going to end up doing make-work projects. It's going to be a tax suck from people who work to people who are doing jobs that are more useless. It is mudslinging jobs. It is digging a hole and filling that hole back in. That's what all these jobs end up being, or at least a lot of them. Okay, so here's what the report continues. It would eliminate poverty wages through the pay structure of the NIEC. The federal job guarantee would provide a job at a minimum annual wage of $24,600 for full-time workers, poverty line for a family of 4, and a minimum hourly wage of $11.83. Well, isn't that weird? I thought Democrats were calling for a $15 minimum wage. I guess now it's only just $11.83 when it's the federal government doing it. So the federal government will pay you $12 an hour, but the private sector will have to pay you $15 an hour. They say workers would have the opportunity to advance within the program, rising from minimum wage in the program to an estimated mean salary of $32,500. The wage would be indexed to the inflation rate to ensure that the purchasing power of enrollees is maintained, and the wage will vary to allow for some degree of regional variation. That rate of wage would continue to rise, paid for by the government as inflation increases. Well, there are a couple of problems with this. Okay, one of the problems is that taking money and injecting it into the system via government spending immediately creates a certain level of price inflation, which means you're going to have to increase the minimum wage as well that you're paying the members of the government, right? These new government workers. If you increase prices and everything is indexed to price inflation, not to actual monetary inflation, to price inflation, then this wage will continue to rise and rise and rise, pushing up pushing up price inflation, and then pushing up the wage that has to be paid for by the federal government. This would also include fringe benefits. To provide a true non-poverty wage and meet the fundamental rights of American citizens, the policy would include health insurance for all full-time workers in the program. So it's not $32,500 a year, it's $43,000 a year that the federal government is going to pay all of these people for make-work programs. My favorite part of this is when they say this. The job guarantee would function as a de facto floor in the labor market, greatly increasing the bargaining position of workers throughout the economy. What they're saying is that if you can get $12 an hour from the federal government, you're not going to work for $7 an hour or $8 an hour over at the local McDonald's, which is true. That also means that it's going to be an increased cost to businesses, private businesses. Those private businesses are then going to have to increase their prices to consumers, which is going to create exactly the price inflation that leads to that spiral I was talking about before. Beyond that, it is also going to lead to increased costs that is going to lead to layoff of workers. Where will those workers go, you ask? Oh, they'll go work for the federal employment program. Look how magical this is, right? You're going to create a higher necessity for wages in the private sector by creating an artificial floor for wages. And then when people are laid off, they will then work for the federal government. And then when the federal government continues to increase its wages to deal with the price inflation that's happening thanks to its own regulations, then more workers will be laid off. Yeah, I can't see how this is going to go wrong in any way. This will be great. What they're really arguing in the end is that money grows on trees. Seriously. This is literally what they are arguing. So according to Ben Judah, he says, a jobs guarantee would be a new idea, but how are you going to pay for that? The emerging left has an answer. By revolutionizing how we think about government spending, not revolutionizing government spending, mind you, by revolutionizing how we think using our brains about government spending. Here is what Ben Judah writes. The rise of Stephanie Kelton, professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University, who advised Bernie Sanders in his 2016 campaign, is mirrored in the rise of, for lifelong cause, modern monetary theory. According to Kelton, money doesn't grow on rich people. It is, in fact, a product produced by the government, the only limits on which is inflation. She's pushing the Democrats to embrace a fiscal revolution, immense deficit spending, because she argues this isn't an automatic trigger for inflation, and crucially, the government doesn't have to balance the books for a resource it creates. Okay, let me explain to you what this is saying. What this is actually saying here is that the government can spend any amount of money that it wants because the government does not have to make up its bonds. The government does not have to tax you. The government doesn't have to do anything. And so long as it doesn't inflate things out of control, it can continue to pour money into the economy in unlimited fashion. This is the stupidest idea ever. It's legitimately a dumb idea. Now, everybody is buying into this idea because it's convenient. People are buying American bonds at exorbitant rates. Well, that doesn't mean that you actually are going to be able to just pump money into the economy endlessly. At a certain point, people are going to realize that we're not paying back their bonds, or that we're going to pay back their bonds with inflated debt, right? Or in the alternative, it is possible that we're going to have to raise taxes dramatically because at a certain point, people are just going to realize that the money isn't worth anything, that if you just are printing out money, like literally going in the back room and just printing out dollars and throwing them into the economy, that those dollars aren't worth anything. So this is their big idea is that the federal government should hire everyone, and that won't hurt anybody. Right? It won't drive up the cost of doing business, won't make business more uncompetitive, won't cripple us on the foreign markets, won't do any of those things. And it won't be a suck from tax dollars to other people to make work jobs. It won't be any of those things. It'll just be great. That's an idea that I apparently have not thought about enough, apparently. And then there's also the idea that money is magical and that the government can just throw it out there and nothing will happen. And you can do this endlessly. You just have the government continue to pump money into the economy. Just pump it in, pump it in. And eventually the government can raise interest rates if things get bad enough, or they can tax, but we won't talk about that stuff. We won't talk about any of that stuff. Yeah, none of this is it's all going to be great. It's all going to be just great. And I love this. But the right has no interest in what is being developed at the Sanders Institute. Right, because it's stupid. Did you not get that part where I said it was dumb? Okay, I've gone through these ideas. I'm happy to consider them, but I'm going to need some better evidence that they will work. We're going to have better economic proposals than spend endless amounts of money and then pretend that none of it matters. This is the brilliance that I'm apparently ignoring.